James, welcome back to Newscast.
Thank you, Chris.
You know, the good news is that you're back. The bad news is I realise that you and me are the warm-up act for Greg James, who's doing Newscast on Friday.
Which is really far more exciting.
It is, really. It is. But you and me, second encounter this week of the political editor and the Scotland editor. There was me in Edinburgh just a matter of days ago. Now you're here in London.
Yeah, your arrival was bigger news in Scotland even than Ken Bruce's departure from Radio 2.
Oh, yeah. Plenty to talk about, not least on the very issue that's dominated our journalistic conversations this week on this edition of Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Chris, back in the studio in Westminster, no longer in Edinburgh.
And it's James Cook, Scotland editor of BBC News, also here in the studio.
So we have got, this week, we've had 2 guests in recent weeks on the Thursday edition of Newscast. This week, we've got 3.
Yeah, for the price of 1. We have Bridget Phillipson, Labour, Shadow Education. We have Grant Chaps, the Business Secretary. And we have the SNP's Deputy Leader in the House of Commons, Mary Black.
And we'll talk to Mary in a second on this issue that's dominated our lives, James, for the last couple of days, which is this coming together of 2 very knotty and complex and controversial issues, one of which is the UK Constitution, which we'll come to in a minute, but the other of which is this planned law that the Scottish Government's been working on for a long time around trans rights.
Yes.
So in summary, what is it?
So what happened was, last month, the Scottish Parliament, by a pretty big majority, passed this legislation. And the legislation, this gender bill, seeks to remove administrative and medical barriers to changing the sex on your birth certificate. That's basically what it does. It's passed the Scottish Parliament, and it was waiting to be given the rubber stamp by the King, royal assent.
But crucially, while the issue of trans rights is devolved to the Scottish Parliament, the issue of equalities is something that's decided at Westminster on behalf of England, Scotland and Wales. And the UK government says, hang on a minute, we think those 2 clash. And there's a line in the rule book that set up devolution a quarter of a century ago that allows us, they say, to pull this trigger and stop that proposed law becoming law and getting royal assent. That's what they've done, and it's caused one heck of a row.
Right, well, let's chat a bit more about that, Chris, with Mary Black, Deputy Leader of the Scottish National Party in the House of Commons. Hi, Mary.
Hello,
Welcome.
how you doing?
Yes, welcome. Right, so, to business.
Where to start?
Where to start? I know, it's been busy.
Yeah.
But the main thing is this, isn't it? Westminster has vetoed a bill of the Scottish Parliament using this particular mechanism for the first time ever. What do you make of it?
I think it's disgraceful, absolutely. I mean, especially considering that in the nearly 8 years that I've been in Parliament, all that we get flung back at is you have the most powerful devolved Parliament in the world. Well, do we? If when we pass something which is absolutely within the devolved competence of the Scottish Parliament, that Westminster, who is a Tory government, which again Scotland hasn't voted for, can just go, nah, you're not passing that law.
I suppose when you say absolutely within the devolved competence, I mean, that's the essence of the row, isn't it? Whether or not it is, given the suggested, as the UK government sees it, consequences of the proposed law elsewhere in Great Britain.
Have you read the statement of reasons?
I have.
Right. Do you see anything that's genuine in that? It is the most flimsy piece of argument that I've ever seen.
To explain, this was the document that the UK government put out to at least partially justify their cause. We haven't actually seen, as Labour Party are demanding, the legal advice that they took their decision based upon.
But let's just be clear, and this is a little bit technical, but it does matter. They are not arguing that this bill is not within the devolved competence of the Scottish Parliament. That's not what they're saying. They're saying it is within competence, i.e. it is a devolved matter that the Scottish Parliament has the right to legislate on. They're saying something slightly more subtle, which is, and I'm so sorry, but using Section 35 of the Scotland Act, 1998, that it impinges on a UK piece of legislation. And there's a problem for the Equality Act, and quite a lot of lawyers back them up.
I think that's nonsense because the House of Commons itself has done 3 reports, the Women and Equalities Committee, and all of those reports came to the conclusion that it does not affect the Equality Act whatsoever. The law that has been passed in the Scottish Parliament does is it's an administrative change. This is about making the process to get a gender recognition certificate much more humane and dignified. That's it. And this has been turned into this, it's been blown out of all proportion, certainly in Scotland. It has for a long, long time.
I mean this respectfully. You're not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I don't believe Chris to be a lawyer.
No.
Lord Hope's a lawyer, though. A very, very eminent one. Former Deputy President of the Supreme Court. One of the greatest legal minds, people say, of his generation. Scots lawyer.
Take your word.
Well, he is. I believe, I'm willing to accept that he is a fine legal mind. He called this statement that you were talking about, the reasons given by the UK government, is devastating to your case, and said the chances of you winning were very low. I mean, it's all very well us kicking this around, but shouldn't we listen to someone like that?
See, well, I can understand people saying that the UK government haven't actually abused any power, so to speak, because Section 35 is part of the Scotland Bill. So
which the SNP voted for.
Yeah, well, in helping establish the Scottish Parliament, yes, which of course we've received numerous benefits from, which the rest of the UK don't. So I can understand folks saying that Westminster haven't, broken any laws or anything like that. But what I'm saying is I don't think they have the right to run roughshod, and what it actually does is it proves that all of the rhetoric that we hear about Scotland and about the Scottish Parliament is hollow because they're able to overrule us whenever they want.
I wonder as well about kind of motivation. I was talking to the First Minister the other day who was and I suggested to her that perhaps this was just an honest disagreement between the two sides, that both of you were approaching it in good faith, and there was honest disagreement. She used similar words to suggest otherwise.
Absolute nonsense.
But let me put to you something that you hear from those in government here in Westminster, which is almost like the counterpoint, which is that they say, you guys must have seen this coming, where the outcome could be useful to you either way. Either you get the law that you're really keen on, and I'm not suggesting anything other than that you're really keen on, or you get a bit of a constitutional stooshy, which allows you to make an argument that devolution isn't really where you want to be and you'd rather get towards independence.
So again, I would say, given the fact that the UK government has never shown any of these concerns about self-ID from other countries, I don't buy this idea that they're coming at this in good faith.
There's a division in your party, isn't there? About how to get there, about the mechanism by which you seek to achieve independence. So Nicola Sturgeon, it strikes me as, I'm interested in your take, because it struck me as odd. Nicola Sturgeon sets out the policy. She says, look, we're going to treat a general election as a de facto referendum. In other words, if you and perhaps other pro-independence parties can win more than 50% of the vote in a general election, you would take that as a mandate to open negotiations with Westminster over Scotland leaving the United Kingdom. So she does that first, and then she says, we're going to have a special party conference to decide whether that's a good idea.
Yeah.
It's a bit odd, isn't it?
I think the UK's setup is pretty odd, to tell you the truth. So, first of all, you're right, we're going to have a conference about this.
So why announce the policy first and then have the conference
So this is what I'm going to come on to,
weird.
right? So we'll have the conference eventually, because there's a wide range of arguments for what election should be used and the best way to do it. But where
Sounds a bit messy.
Of course it's messy, and the reason it's messy is because the SNP and the Scottish Government have been elected numerous times on a commitment manifesto to have a second referendum. Now, the UK government are the ones ignoring that. They're the ones who are going, nah, it doesn't matter, matter.
And I get that you can make an argument about a sense of democratic injustice.
So that's what I think.
So you're confronted because you've run out of other options or better ideas to get a referendum by a choice.
We shouldn't have to explore other options.
But still, given where we are, the cart was before the horse, wasn't it? The leader of your party announces the policy and then says, I'll ask the party what they want.
Well, I mean, you could look at it that way.
Well, that's exactly how it is.
Well, I mean, but she's moved now. She's recognising that actually, if we're going to take on this massive establishment, let's think about this and make sure everyone's, on
the party's
board.
going wobbly on which test it's going to set itself.
I honestly don't think the party is going wobbly.
I want to ask you one more thing, which is more of a personal thing. Now, the first time we met, if you recall, was the 2015 general election in which you were elected, and before you were elected, and we came out on the campaign trail with you. We had quite an interesting day, I think, knocking on doors, and you were taking on Douglas Alexander. Of course, you won. And you go to the House of Commons, and you're what they call, and I bet you don't like this, the baby of the House, but that's what they call it, the youngest MP. How old were you? 20?
20.
Right. And now you're the deputy leader of the party at Westminster. It's a journey, isn't it? I mean, it's a big question, but what's that been like?
It's all downhill for here, I've peaked too soon.
What was the start of that journey like, being so young? And I don't mean to be, I really don't mean to be...
No, of course, you're not patronising at all.
Patronising,
No,
but
not at all.
it's unusual.
Yeah, definitely. So, honestly, I mean, the answers that I gave when I was 20 were true. It was a case that I became impassioned by the independence referendum. I was, knee-deep in policy and politics. And, of course, we lost the referendum. And I thought, we've not put in this amount of work for things to just go back to the way they were. This has to change. And people were encouraging me to put my name forward. And eventually I thought, I can't argue with them anymore. They're winning the argument.
But when you got here to Westminster, how were you treated?
It was a mixture, to tell you the truth.
Did people patronise you?
Oh God, aye, yes. Not just because of being young, but because you're a woman in Westminster as well.
Within your own party?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. But
in what way?
Just like that, patronising or undermining, or saying things or doing things that they would never do to an older male colleague. What? Just whether it's undermining or being rude or leaving you out of things or deliberately not giving you the full picture. Just
your colleagues.
This is politics.
No, but these are your colleagues you're talking about.
Well, not any current colleagues, I should say, and it was very minute. The real abuse, actually, which surprised me, came from the Labour Party, to tell you the truth. Because what shocked me when I came down was the Tories could not have been nicer. They were all so polite, holding doors open. Good morning, how are you?
Did that change your perception of because plenty of people who are political opponents of the Conservatives will be pretty outspoken about them. That's the nature of politics.
I've heard you being pretty tub-thumping about them.
No, just because you are very smiley and polite as you tell me that you don't think I should have certain rights doesn't make it any less horrific, I can appreciate, I can talk to anybody. I can, as long as folk treat you with respect. But fundamentally, when we're in there, we're talking about politics that affects everybody's lives. So I think there's a very high bar which a lot of members, mainly Conservative, don't really meet.
Mary, cheers for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So we got the perspective there of the SNP. We're going to talk to Labour in a bit. Let's get the perspective of the Conservatives next, because we can talk to the Business Secretary, Grant Chaps, who is in Davos, in the snow, in Switzerland at the World Economic Forum. Hello, Grant.
Hi there, hi.
It looks very nice. They're a bit cloudy, but the lovely mountains behind you. I suppose the question people looking at those lovely mountains might have, though, is why is that minister swanning around in the beautiful Swiss Alps when people here are, to be brutally honest, dying on hospital trolleys and freezing in their homes?
I think the truth is, when the world gathers together and there are all those businesses and other ministers from around the world, what you get is the opportunity to discuss a lot of things which matter to us back home, none more so than bringing home investment to the UK, bringing jobs to the UK. And so to not be here runs the risk of jobs going elsewhere.
You're also an MP for a constituency in the southeast of England, of course. So I guess you must be pretty delighted to hear about this levelling up money heading your way. Although I wonder if some people might be a bit surprised to hear it heading to the southeast, with all the talk about levelling up in the north of the country. Labour is saying this is just a partial refund on the money that's essentially been stripped away from them by years of austerity. Is that fair?
Well, they came up with the same old lines no matter what you do. The fact is we were elected in 2019 with that mission to level up. It's not true what you're saying about London and the South East got about half as much money, even in this round. It's the second round, compared with, say, the North West, for example. So actually the money is much more spread across the country than is suggested.
I get that there's always an argument about precisely where the money goes and how you measure a sense of fairness, because there are some pointing out that if you look at it per head of population, it reflects better in terms of the north-south argument than it might do in a different way. But I wonder, Grant, about the absolute... the formula, the mechanism via which your government's whole approach to this business of trying to address regional geographical inequalities is based. Andy Street, your colleague, the Conservative Mayor of the West Midlands, has said this afternoon that in his view, the whole way of having different areas competing against each other to get hold of money suggests that the Whitehall bidding and begging bowl culture is broken, he says. The centralised system of London civil servants making local decisions is flawed. I suppose that idea that there's somebody sitting in a building in central London deciding whether somewhere in Morecambe or Gateshead or Welwyn gets money. How can they possibly know better than people locally that that's a good idea?
Look, I think the truth is that you've got to run a country somehow, right? So you've got to have some sort of system in place. Not everything can be decided from the local town hall or even the local
isn't
mayor.
the argument, Chaps, that it's not about everything, that we live in an incredibly centralised, England in particular, lives in an incredibly centralised country, and the UK as well, arguably.
I was going to say push back gently against that if I could, because I was going to say actually Andy Street in the West Midlands, no one's done more than him as a mayor to actually ensure that he's been bringing huge resources, and all credit to him. I'd say the same.
But he still reckons the system doesn't work.
In the North East, he's been doing the same thing as well. Well, you've got to have a system of some kind, right? You're going to collect taxes centrally, and if we're going to have a serious conversation about this, you're going to collect taxes centrally. You've got to think of a way of dividing that up. Just to your point about centralisation, I've been in politics quite a while. I don't remember a time where there's been more localisation and regionalisation of those funds. And even in my own department, we're moving people out at quite a pace to other places. I went to our office in Leeds the other week for the business department, and hundreds of people not sitting in Whitehall, but government shifting itself out of London as well. So I agree with the idea that the country, the closer you can govern to people, the better. But in the end, we are one nation. You've got to collect the money somewhere. Decisions have to be made somehow. And actually, I do think the West Midlands has done superbly well under Andy Street, and long may it last.
Well, something that is happening all across the nation is strikes, isn't it? I mean, we're seeing nurses, teachers, paramedics, civil servants all out or heading out in the coming days and weeks. This industrial relations problem is getting worse, is it not?
Yeah, and look, fundamentally, I think we have to kind of recognise that things are tough, and things are tough because Putin invaded Ukraine. It pushed up energy prices and has pushed inflation.
When I asked you, are industrial relations getting worse? You said yes. I'm just being clear that is your view. That is what you think.
Well, I mean, it would be crazy to say that, compared with, say, a couple of years ago, we were experiencing strikes, and we weren't then. The difference, of course, is not only going through COVID and all of that, but primarily the increase in inflation. I suspect that if we hadn't seen inflation spike as it did because of Putin's war in Ukraine, the energy prices and therefore the inflation that's followed it, I don't suppose we would have this industrial action now. So
and do you accept that it's worse now than it was, say, a month or 2 months ago?
To say strikes aren't worse than they were, of course, wouldn't be true. Yeah, because the impact on people's lives and livelihoods through high inflation is having a bigger impact. And I want to say, right up front, we massively appreciate the work that the public sector does, and we appreciate the work that nurses and train drivers and everyone else does. In the private sector, we're not seeing the settlements of the sort of 19%, which is one of the pay requests. We have done our part, which is to accept an independent process to come to a figure in each of these different sectors. And for us to then walk away from that means that we're expecting the taxpayer to stump up more money than the independent pay review bodies say should be summed up in each individual case. And that's a difficult argument to run, I think.
Let's talk about the whole idea of minimum service levels or minimum safety levels, this idea that it is put into law that there is a a baseline provision of a service during a time of industrial action. Let's put to one side, the arguments for or against that idea. There are those who will make a passionate case for it and others who will criticise it. What about the issue of timing? Is doing it right now, when there is clearly a fractious relationship between the government and plenty of trade unions, is that helpful in actually doing the one thing that plenty of newscasters will want seeing, which is a resolution to these industrial disputes so that they're not inconvenienced every day?
Well, we both want to see it resolved, and we've made a real push, particularly into the new year, to try to do that. But look, actually, what has moved us on this is we've seen people's lives potentially put in some danger by not having a nationally agreed safety level, minimum safety level in place, particularly when it came to ambulances. On the other hand, when it comes to the nurses and the Royal College of Nursing, we found that very responsibly, we thought they agreed at national level, a minimal level of safety and service. And so, all we're saying to the unions is, look, it cannot be right to leave in ambulance areas it down to individual areas, regions, trusts. But instead, that should be decided at a national level. Otherwise, how can we ask our army to cover for the ambulances if they don't know where they're going to be?
Grant Chaps, last question. We can see you, for those who are watching Newscast as opposed to listening, you are well wrapped up. What's your technique for staying warm in the Davos winter?
So one is the hand warmers that I have here. This one's not actually particularly warm, looks like a tea bag. I'm keeping that in my pocket. And the other little hidden secret is under my jacket here I have one of these jackets which attaches to the kind of battery you might use to charge your phone, and it is giving me a warm sort of
battery-powered coat.
I tell you what, you want to watch going through airport security with that on.
Years of going to football and watching my sons play football and standing on very cold sidelines has taught me to dress up very warm.
Well, you look cosy. Thanks very much, Grant Chaps, Business Secretary. Thanks for joining us on Newscast.
Thank you.
So from the Business Secretary in his high-tech puffer jacket in the snow in Davos in Switzerland, here in the Newscast studio, we've got Bridget Phillipson, Labour MP, Shadow Education Secretary. Welcome.
Good to see you.
Davos, let's talk about Davos for a minute and talking to Grant Chaps there. It's a curious old kind of gathering, isn't it? And it kind of, plenty of critics will say it kind of screams the global elite. Keir Starmer's been over there as well in the last few days. What is the value for it? We were asking Grant Chaps that. To you, what is the value of your leader going off and mingling with a load of millionaires and chief executives? What value does that bring to your constituents, to this country?
I think it shows we're serious about the approach that we'd be taking from government, and the fact that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have both gone out there demonstrates the change in our relationship with business. We are serious about working with business to drive kind of growth and new jobs in our economy, and that, Keir has been talking while he's there about the need to, decarbonise the economy, but how we use that as an opportunity to create brilliant jobs. And I think there's real potential in every corner of our country, and particularly in communities that, haven't seen that kind of those jobs or investment for some time.
Let's talk about childcare, because you've been doing quite a bit of thinking about childcare and what a Labour government would do as far as childcare in England is concerned. And it's pretty radical. It set out your vision. I think it's even involved a trip to Estonia and looking at how they do it.
Yeah, I think just to go back a slight step in identifying what the problem is and what we're seeking to solve. So at the minute, so many parents pay so much on childcare, often more than their rent or mortgage. And actually, we're still in the position where lots of women are giving up work in growing numbers, and it usually is women because they can't afford childcare or it's not available. And that has a big cost in economic growth. It has a big cost to the individual and to the family, and also to children who do need a really great start in life, and really high quality childcare and early years education is an important part of that. So, we've set out that we believe we need to fundamentally rethink how we approach childcare in this country. It should be a part of our education system. We need to make sure that those issues around affordability and availability are addressed. And for me, that involves building a modern childcare system. So from the end of parental leave, when most parents will return to work, to the end of primary school. And what we've set out as a first step around that is universal free breakfast clubs for every primary school child in England. So to ease that pressure that parents face around the school day, not just when their children are young.
How much then, in specific terms, would the breakfast club idea cost?
So that's £365 million a year, and that's paid for out of the changes that we put in place around non-dom tax status. So, as I say, everything that we set out, fully funded, fully costed, and a plan to deliver it. But that would make a massive difference to so many parents who, giving up shifts, can't get to work on time, because with that hard drop off of 8:45, whatever it happens to be.
If you were Education Secretary for England, what would you do to stop the strikes that are coming up in schools?
I would have been talking about this months ago with the trade unions. We've known that this has been coming for a very, very long time.
Crucially, saying what? So I know that you have, and spoken to Keir Starmer about this, say, look, there's got to be a dialogue. You've got to get people around the table in order to get to a resolution, and most people would accept that. But crucially, it's what happens around that table, doesn't it? And they're going to say, we know what they're going to say because they say it in public. They want more money than is currently on the table. So logic would suggest the only way it is going to be resolved is if there is more money. Would there be more money under Labour?
I take your point. However, you've got to be around the table to be having that discussion. It's only been in the last week that ministers have been willing to meet and discuss it.
Let's accept that. And obviously part of your role, understandably, is to critique the government. What do you do in the situation right now if you were sitting in the seat of the Secretary of State for Education?
I do think you have to get ahead of problems. I'll come on to what I would do. You do have to get ahead of problems. We've known this was coming for months and they haven't been willing to talk about pay. The first indicative ballot took place last September, and yet here we are, and the government haven't taken this seriously. I'd take it seriously. I would want to work with trade unions to deliver better outcomes for children and proper support for teachers.
Taking it seriously would mean putting more money on the table, and I'm asking you, would you do that?
I'm not going to make commitments right now, in that we don't really know what the economic situation the next Labour government will inherit, other than it's going to be pretty parlous, not least because we've had such a have had years now of poor growth, and the more recent.
Do any more?
What Labour did, Labour's record from government last time around was real terms increases in pay for teachers. We did make sure that people were properly supported for what they were doing. Yes, pay is absolutely important, of course it is, but it's terms and conditions and workload too, and that comes up time and time again. Teachers just feel underappreciated, undervalued for the work that they do.
I'm trying to establish definitively whether or not you're suggesting, as you seem to be, that the government should, that the Labour Party's position is that the government should sort out conditions for teachers and pay them more than they're currently being offered. And I mean, tell me if that's not your position, but it seems to me that it is.
Labour from government, whether it's teachers, nurses, all of our brilliant public servants, we always want to make sure that they get a fair deal. And under Labour governments in the past, they always have had a fair deal, but we're not in government yet.
And the deal at the moment is not fair?
I think when you look at the fact that experienced teachers have had a 13% pay cut over the last decade, I don't think that's right.
I've got to ask you a final question that has nothing to do with your shadow ministerial responsibilities whatsoever, but picks up on a conversational strand we had with Grant Chaps out in Davos. He was wearing a battery-powered puffer jacket to keep warm. So not only did he have a million layers on, and then this coat that looked pretty adequate at the job in hand, but he told us it had some sort of battery pack to pump hot air around him or something. And I'm wondering, I started my career in your neck of the woods in the northeast of England. And of course, the famous cliche is that people are so tough they can go out in the winter without a coat on at all. But what's the Wearside, the Sunderland solution to the January weather and keeping warm? Have you got a battery-powered coat?
No, as you say, I'm from the northeast, so I can more than manage a bit of cold weather. I think I'd be all right.
As they say, you go out in the streets like
well,
this.
I do have a coat.
Tough.
I do have a coat, but I can manage. I'm used to the bad weather.
Southern softy.
Well, your words, not mine.
Thank you very much.
Cheers for coming on.
Thank you.
Cheers. So that is your lot from James and from me. And newscasters, you have an upgrade tomorrow.
Yeah, the professionals will be here tomorrow because we have Greg James, Radio 1's Greg James, and Roisin Hastie from the BBC World Service.
Well worth a listen. From us, thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Newscast from the BBC.